I'd like to welcome you to tonight's Development Review Commission for May 23rd, 2017. We have a somewhat abbreviated schedule tonight and also a somewhat abbreviated commission. You can see there are only 5 of us here tonight, so that may alter our proceedings slightly. But we're glad to see so many of you here to share your thoughts and comments, and we'll make sure that there's time for that one way or another. Ordinarily, we would well, let me do introductions. I always forget the introductions. And also the purpose of the DRC. Let's read that too. The Development Review Commission is created to hold public meetings and hearings to provide analysis and recommendations to the City Council regarding general land use policies and applications where the Commission has power to recommend and to render final decisions on specified applications where the Commission has final decision-making power, including, but not limited to, all aspects of a proposed and future development. The Development Review Commission recognizes that the creation of a desirable environment throughout the city for residents, business, and industry is a prime requisite for the interdependence of land values, aesthetics, and good site planning by promoting harmonious, safe, attractive, and compatible development that is therefore considered to be in the best interest of public health, safety, and general welfare. On our commission tonight, on my left, we have Commissioner Phil Amorosi and Commissioner Barbara Lloyd. I am Vice Chair David Lyon. To my right is Commissioner Nick Labadie and Thomas Brown. For city staff tonight, we have Suparna Dasgupta, Obina Kingsby, Diana Kaminsky, Cynthia Gerard, and I think I've seen a couple in our audience from our city staff as well, so we'll thank them for their attendance. Our first item on our agenda is going to be Tempe Crane. If you'd like to, we'll ask our applicant to approach and tell us about the project.
Vice Chair, would you take a motion on the minutes to continue it to the...
Oh, we should continue the minutes. Okay, I'm sorry, one moment. All right, so as I mentioned, we're a little short-handed on our commission tonight. Turns out we only have 3 commissioners here that were at the previous meeting, so we're not able to pass the minutes now, so we're going to look for a motion to continue the approval of those minutes until next meeting. Can I hear a motion on such?
I make a motion to continue the minutes, approval of the minutes till the June 13th meeting.
Second.
Okay, all in favor by a raise of hands. You can indeed. So that's unanimous, 5-0. Okay, so with that item taken care of, we'll try a second time.
Oh, third time's not the charm because I don't think I don't want to come back a third time. I appreciate your time. Charles Humel, for the record, P.O. Box 1833, Tempe, Arizona. The case before you this evening is Tempe Crane. I'm going to give you a brief piece of history, then talk a little bit about the case, and then answer any questions you might have. Tempe Crane has been in Tempe since the 60s. It was originally at Fifth Street and Ash, not too far from where Thomas works. It was then moved to its current location, which is Rio Salado and across from Tempe Marketplace. In the last year or so, they made the decision to sell the property, and they sold it to a larger property just across the street from Marketplace that's getting ready to develop. And maybe a little faster than they had anticipated, they had to move out of the property that they own now. And they were actually looking to move in Gilbert, and many of us in Tempe thought that was not so great, given that it's called Tempe Crane. And so we convinced them to stay. One of the existing owners in the industrial area that we're locating in agreed to sell Tempe Crane a piece of his property. As you may or may not know, that industrial area has been pretty tight-knit for a couple of generations, actually. It's pretty impressive how many of those businesses have stayed in Tempe. And so they rallied around and found a place for Tempe Crane to be. It has, in the process of returning back to Tempe, kind of created its own problems in terms of timing. As you might imagine, Tempe Crane has lots of big machinery. Some of the things you've probably seen as you've had a tree cut or an air conditioning unit lifted to your roof, but they do much bigger stuff as well. They have some really big machinery. The red box in this map illustrates the area where they currently reside today. It's a pretty nice, usable lot, close to all kinds of transportation all around the valley. The long blue sliver is the location that they're going in. It's a much tighter site from the position of having large equipment, but we're able to make it work. It's worth noting as you look at this piece, if you look to the left, you can see another building that kind of mirrors the blue slice. And that's because this property was originally designed to have two pieces on it, a mirror of the piece that's, again, as I look at it to the left. That piece won't be built. Tempe Crane wants something very different than what was approved many years ago. And the second piece, the mirror image of this building, was never built. Again, this image, I think, shows a little bit better about how the site, which was originally two parcels and then at the request of the city created into one parcel many, many years ago, and now we seek to break it apart again as two separate parcels. The site has been vacant for a very long time. If you've driven by it, you've seen it looks pretty much like this, pretty much like a site that's been vacant for a very long time. And we have worked hard. This is an industrial site, and the standards are more relaxed in industrial sites, but we haven't approached the project that way. We know that this industrial park in particular is a nice one. We have a lot of care about Tempe, and so we've tried to design a pretty attractive building. This is an industrial site. We're not asking for rezoning. It's just a DPR. You have extensive information both in our response and as well as the staff's recommendation packet. I'm happy to talk in greater detail about cranes or anything else you'd like, but it seems like maybe I should just take questions.
Okay, questions for our applicant?
Mr. Hugh Mantle, is the metal shed along the south wall?
Yes.
That's where that's going to go.
Let me just show you, actually, rather than just saying yes. You can see the design. By the way, the metal shed is an important building. It's an important building now. We're going to dismantle it and move it. It's a very particular building that they're used to repair the cranes and other machinery. And it's important that we're able to move it too, because it'll help us stay in business without being homeless. We will, for some period of time, be homeless professionally, which means that we'll have to get the site graded, get the walls up, and then we'll likely have to bring equipment on. This equipment, as you might imagine, is pretty valuable, and there's a concern of theft and protecting it. But we also have to maintain it. Many of the pieces need to be repaired almost daily, and so this shed has a particular use of being able to fix the machinery. If you look at the site, it gets a little bit longer near the end, and it's that bottom piece at the very back is where that metal shed will go. And again, it's the same metal shed that stands today in Tempe. It will just be relocated and refurbished.
Thank you.
There was another question, too, that I didn't have, I guess I should have addressed and didn't, and that is, that when we screen the air conditioning units, what will we use? Will we simply use a sheet metal, or would we be willing to use a material that's complementary to the pallet, which in this case is probably a stucco or an ephes, to build the screen? And the answer is we're willing to use an ephes or a stucco. We've spent a lot of time and money designing a building that we think is attractive, and that's a good suggestion. And so we would not be using just plain sheet metal. We'd be willing to use stucco or an ephes. Any other questions that I could answer?
Commissioners? All right, well, thank you, Mr. Hugh Mantle. At this time, it is customary for us to hear public commentary. If you wish to speak on this case, we have cards in the back of the room, which many of you have availed yourself for our following case. Is there anyone who wishes to speak on this case from our public tonight? I don't see any. I do have one comment which I received by email from Miss Linda Spears, and she says the office project is fine. That's her comment. Okay. So
Vice Chair Lyon, I'm assuming you would not want a staff presentation since you've already asked the applicant for a presentation, but it's fine. But we have.
Insult tonight. You keep catching me.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to point out the revision to one of the stipulations, if you are taking a motion to put that in the action of the motion.
I have
That's all.
robbed you of your moment of glory. So, being that I'm doing everything in the wrong order tonight, let's ask our city staff if they would like to give us any presentation on this case.
Good evening, Commission. Albina Kingsley, Planner 2, City of Tempe. As Charles said, Tempe Crane is proposing 2 new buildings on the industrial site. One is an office building, one is the metal shed building that we're talking about is for storage and repairs. The development that they're applying right now for is, a DPR, a development plan review for a site plan, landscape modification, or landscape and building elevations. With this, you pretty much touched on majority of the items. I will give them that, Charles. There's not much else to add to it. Besides, like Sparn brought up the additional condition or the modification of the condition, we'd like to item number 2 under general. And the only other thing with that, it's pretty abbreviated here, staff is recommending approval for the project. And with that, we are recommending approval because the project will meet the development standards required by the zoning development code. And also the project meets the approval criteria for development plan review. Yeah, very brief synopsis presentation.
Thank you. And would you indulge me? Would you read into the record for us what that modification to that stipulation is?
Okay, yes. Staff would like to re-enter the record for condition number 2 under general as follows. An amended subdivision plat is required for the development and shall be recorded to issuance of final certificate of occupancy.
Super. Thank you, Albina.
I might add that the stipulations are, they work well for us. We thank staff for working with us. In fact, the modification you just heard, I think, is designed to help accommodate our rushed schedule. So staff's been great to work with, and we appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. And while we've got you, would you care to comment on our public comment that the office project is fine?
I find Commissioner Spears to be wise, and in this case, I would hope you would see that as a motion to approve.
Okay. So now, Mr. Huell-Mantel, we have an interesting situation for you. Since we have a short commission tonight, and you require 4 votes in the affirmative for your project to pass, you do have the option to continue your case until a future meeting. Is that something that you would be interested in doing?
Although it's a problem of our own making, based on time, it really isn't even an option for us. It would not allow us to move forward. So we'll hope that with no negative questions, you're all positive. But if not, we'll suffer our fate and crane our way out of here.
Okay. Entertaining as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's have commissioner discussion. Commissioners? Commissioner Brown.
Normally, the city doesn't allow tin sheds anywhere, as far as I can tell. This one is probably the least offensive in the city of Tempe. It's surrounded by the tin sheds, and it's completely screened by the development. Also, I realize that in this industrial park of this sort, tin sheds probably pop up from time to time after a building is built, especially if the building was built in 1940. So I think at the risk of not I want to be sure we're not establishing a precedent of tin sheds and tinny metal buildings used in industrial parks typically would not be permitted. I think we can be realistic in this case and perhaps use a little bit of common sense and recognize that it's not that offensive or a significant problem. That's the extent of my thoughts on this building.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Did I hear Commissioner Amorosi? Did you have something to add? I thought. Other comments? Well, I will throw my 2 cents in and say that I agree with Linda Spears. I think the project's fine. I think it's actually quite a nice office considering it's an industrial project. And I think they've done a really nice job of making the site work with a truck turnaround in such a narrow site. I think it's a good project. I'm in favor of it. No other comments? I will hear a motion. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. I move that we approve as submitted with the stipulation read into the record by Mr. Kingsley to approve Tempe Crane PL 170106.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion to approve Tempe Crane. All those in favor, by show of hands, please. And that is 5-0 in the affirmative.
Thank you. Particularly in light of your attendance, we appreciate your unity. Thank you.
Okay. Our next case is Apache and Oak, PL 160429, our main event. And this time, let me ask our city staff if they will give us the presentation first.
Good evening, Commission. Diana Kaminsky, City of Tempe Planning. The project is located on the southwest corner of Apache Boulevard and Oak Street. It's an existing motel that's been out of use for several years. There was another use that attempted to go in and do an adaptive reuse to it, but it didn't work out. It's been in disrepair for quite some time. The proposed site is for a mixed-use project. They are proposing to amend the general plan to allow higher density and the zoning ordinance for a mixed-use 4 project, which with a PAD overlay. And this is so that they can modify the standards to meet the intent of the design of this particular product. They're proposing a density of 52 dwelling units per acre. The chart on the screen here and in the report shows the bedroom and unit count, 46 units with 64 bedrooms. They are proposing an increase in height. They've got a 2-stepped height proposal where they would have higher height at the Apache side, and then it would decrease down towards the back of the project along Oak to the alley side. So they are following the step-down process that we have in the code for adjacency to single family. They have a relatively low lot coverage because the footprint of the building is 3 small buildings on the first floor with some podium parking and some courtyard space in the interstitial areas, and then the rest of the building is above ground. So there's actually quite a bit of landscape on the first ground level, and then they are making some modifications to the setbacks, including increases to the setbacks from what they would be allowed under the CSS zoning that they have today. They are complying with the TOD parking requirements. They are proposing a use permit for tandem parking to allow them flexibility with the ground floor commercial spaces, a combination of restaurant and retail uses. But the tandem would give them the flexibility to increase the restaurant component if they found a tenant that needed more space. Site plan configuration has access from Apache and Oak. This was actually a requirement of the fire department in order to have access through the site. You can see the predominant portion of the building is at the north side along Apache, a smaller portion at the east end on the south side of the project with surface parking, and then there's 1 level of underground parking that serves the residents. This is the landscape plan. They've proposed a perimeter landscape plan on both the west and the south side, and then a different street tree along Oak and Apache. Shows you the first floor plan and the subterranean garage parking. Second floor plan and the third floor plan, there's a walkway that connects the 2 buildings that goes to an amenity deck on the second floor where there are 2 units with an upper 3rd floor living area that accesses to that amenity space with some private patios. 4th and 5th floors are only along the north portion of the property, along Apache. They've provided a site section to show the sight lines to and from their property to the adjacent single family on the other side of the alley. It's a 20-foot alley with a 10-foot setback, so they have 30 feet before they actually get to the building. And you can see how they've stepped it down towards the south side. These are the proposed elevations. They've got a combination of materials. They do want some flexibility on the ground floor street frontage, depending on their tenant. So it is predominantly a glazed storefront system, but there is a condition in there that they add masonry, depending on who the tenant is and where their storefront openings are. The This is the street view on Apache. This is the corner view looking southwest from Oak and Apache. This is looking east from the western side of the property. And that's it. Staff has received 17 emails in the last week. 16 of those are in opposition. There were probably about 50 people at the neighborhood meeting that I attended. There was a summary of that report of the neighborhood meeting provided by the applicant with their comment cards that was provided in your packet. The additional comments that I've received over the last week were provided to you in the pre-session. The largest concerns from the community, I know many of them are here to speak tonight, are about the issue of changing the general plan for the density that they're proposing, rather than working within the existing zoning or the existing density that's allowed, concerns about the height, concerns about traffic. The city staff and I believe the applicant also have their traffic engineer here to address any concerns that may arise related to traffic. There was a traffic study done, and it was not determined based on the density proposed to be a significant impact to the area with what's proposed in the surrounding community. So staff is recommending approval of the project, but we do recognize there have been a significant number of residents in opposition to the project. Any comment or questions?
Yes.
I think this is a question for staff, just because it has been somewhat of a precedent set on the light rail in the Transportation Overlay District to, I don't want to use the word mandate, but require retail on the first floor of these mixed-use properties. And on a property this size that has some issues with height, is it possible to take another look at that requirement for this particular project? So maybe we can lose a floor instead of requiring it to be retail?
Well, the mixed-use component, it's currently zoned CSS, which is commercial. So it could be a hotel or an office building or whatever they wanted within the commercial. They could actually do a combination of commercial and residential in the CSS. The mixed use is requested specifically for the increase in density. And in order to do mixed use per the zoning ordinance and the general plan, there is a requirement for commercial. So short of changing the text in our documents, the intention of mixed use truly was to provide a combination of uses, not a purely residential product. Sure, there's different ways that this site could be configured that could lower it. You could have structured parking and fill in that void that you see on the screen there with structure, which would lower it. We do not have a ratio for the amount of commercial. In this case, and I can let the applicant speak to what they're proposing on the ground floor, it seems like the amount of retail and restaurant that they're proposing is a more likely sustainable model than what we've seen on some of the larger sites.
I agree with that, and it was just more of a, I think, a philosophical question if it had to be retail or commercial. Thanks.
Thank you.
There's my microphone. With that, we'll ask our applicant to approach the podium and tell us about their project.
Commissioners, good evening. My name is Jason Boyer. I am the architect and development manager representing the property owner of 1461 East Apache. In this case, my role is somewhat unique in that I am working directly with the property owner to act as their development manager for this project, and have been working closely with them since October. I'm also the architect with Studio Ma. The property owner is M&L Arizona #1, and David Cameron is in the audience tonight representing the ownership group. The architect is Studio Ma. The landscape architect is Floor Associates, Christina Floor. And we do, as Diana said, have our traffic engineer here tonight if you have questions specifically related to traffic or some of the neighbors' concerns about traffic on this site. So I'll be somewhat brief in the front end because I think Diana did a pretty comprehensive job of covering the application. We obviously sit in the rail corridor of Tempe. We sit in a MU mixed-use zone per the general plan, and the current density allowance is for medium to high density, allowing 25 dwelling units per acre. We are requesting for an increase to high density, which in this case, per the general plan, is defined up to 65 dwelling units per acre. As we get into the presentation, we'll define what we're asking for further. It is not up to 65. The site is within the Dorsey station area. Given we're within the station area, we do have access to additional height. We're currently zoned CSS TOD, which allows for 45 feet of height, and with a use permit up to 54 feet. So we could, in the current zoning, propose a residential product over a mixed-use podium base, which would have a much more dense footprint on the site, probably requiring more retail and less open space. One of the things that we think is inherently strongest about our proposal is the amount of open space area. To reacquaint you with the site, I know some of you are very familiar with it, some of you may be less. It's currently occupied by a two-story motel that's been vacant for nearly a year and a half. Prior to that, it was occupied by a variety of tenants, including a fraternity, that didn't really contribute to the well-being of the neighborhood. This is a view from Hudson, the First Street Inn, off of Apache at Oak, looking back towards the property. So our application request asks for 5 things. We're asking for a general plan amendment. We're asking for a zoning adjustment. We've submitted a PAD, a development plan review, and we're asking for a use permit for a small amount of tandem parking. And I'll get into the specifics of that request as we go into the presentation. To come back to the general plan amendment request and zoning adjustment request. So today, as the property sits, I mentioned what's allowable is 25 dwelling units per acre. We're asking for it to be changed to high, which puts us at 65, with an actual unit count of 46. The height that we're asking for, well, we're actually asking for a change from CSS TOD to MU4 TOD with 66 feet of height that would step down at Oak and 17% of open space. Now, on your screen, what I've provided for you is some of the allowable zoning that's accessible to us, both with the current CSS, where you can see height both with and without a use permit, lot coverage with and without a use permit. R4, which is our neighbor to our west, what they currently have accessible to them being grandfathered in. MU3 within a station area, and MU2 within a station area. I had not, on this slide prior, included MU2, but I added it here because I think it's important to note that the height within the MU2 is allowable at 50 feet with 60 feet and a use permit. Still with 75 and up to 82% lot coverage. Our proposal asks for 66 feet at Apache with 5 stories, 4 stories of residential over a retail base that's highly porous on the site, specifically to create an activated ground plane that allows the restaurant to flourish, the restaurateurs that we would target to flourish, that allows those spaces to be occupied by not only the residents of this proposal, but the neighbors that surround these neighborhoods. We've spoken with several commercial real estate brokers specializing in retail. They view the design proposal and the site as being a highly sought after site location. It's a smaller footprint. It's not set up for a large restaurant. It's set up for a sort of locally owned, more authentic restaurateur to go in there. And then, as Diana mentioned in her proposal, we also have a sort of food retail space, but we've asked for and provided the parking so that if that space converted to a smaller scale restaurant, or one restaurateur came in and wanted both spaces to support their brand, that flexibility exists. These are a series of diagrams. These are what I would call yield studies. They're not architecture. They're simply about identifying height, potential, and lot coverage potential with both CSS and the MU2 that many of the neighbors have commented they would prefer us to seek on the site. We're asking for MU4 because we're asking for a unit count that meets what we believe the market need is for this type of product in the Apache corridor. So MU2, we're slightly under an acre site. With MU2, we would be allowed 22 dwelling units. There's another view. These views are all taken from the same shots that you saw, the perspectives that Diana shared with you, and a view from the neighborhood. So here you see, again, CSS, TOD, MU2, TOD, up to 60 feet. MU4, TOD, with 66 feet, only at Apache, 110 plus feet back from our property line, 130 feet with the alley, and with the backyard setbacks, it's nearly 177 feet from the nearest residential property. So Diana ran you through the site plan, so I'll be somewhat brief, but the green areas indicate the restaurant areas. The purple is a small commercial office area, and the remainder of the physical footprint that hits the ground is stair cores and lobby for the residential. In this diagram here, you can see the intentional porosity of the site, that we would engage Apache activity, that we would engage Oak Street activity. We've also proposed right-of-way improvements along Oak, including 6 on-street parking spaces. At the center of the site, as you come in from the north off Apache, and this circulation path was essentially mandated by Tempe Fire as we worked with them. You come in off Apache, circle through, the fire trucks have clear access all the way through and under the building as it extends along Oak. At the center of the site, there's a ramp down, which would be to resident parking. So resident parking would be underground, secured, separated from the majority of on-site, on-grade parking. And then just to the south of that, you'll see there's 12 spaces. Those 12 spaces are configured in a tandem configuration, okay? So we're asking for tandems in this location to support the retail, the restaurant, excuse me. We believe that a successful restaurateur in this space will staff that space, staff this parking lot with valet during certain hours of occupancy, typically the afternoon to evening hours, to best manage vehicle flow on site. And so rather than, the site's very tight, as you can see. It's under an acre. We're trying to do, make a very sort of efficient use of a compact site. And so those tandem spaces, while they're not required under our parking count, I mean, we believe they are beneficial to the viability of the commercial retail or the commercial restaurant space, and we believe they're beneficial to the neighbors by us accommodating more valet served spaces on site for the restaurant use. The section of the building is shown here. Again, 5 stories at Apache. Retail ground floor, 16-foot clear floor to floor. Underground parking with a leg of the building that extends along Oak that would have 4 units in it. So we've asked for 46 units with our proposal. 42 of those 46, 91% of the residential density and height is stacked along Apache. We've shown in this sectional diagram, you can see trees progressing from 36-inch box trees that would be planted, and then the silhouettes indicate trees at year 3, 5, 10, and full maturity. And then you can see the alley space and the backyard setback of the nearest resident neighbor. This is a landscape plan, again, describing visually the open porosity of the site. We see the spaces between the restaurant pads as being highly activated spaces that the neighbors would use. We're providing bike storage within the development for the residents. We're providing bike amenities such as pump stations, which would be accessible not only to the residents but also to the neighbors. We're providing, dog bowl, water amenities within the courtyards. And the idea is to create a highly active ground plane in this building and at this corner, a place where people want to be. Diana mentioned the amenity. To be clear, the amenity is on the 3rd level. So to the right, you see the amenity level. The 2 white boxes are small loft spaces that extend from the 2nd floor up. So there's 4 units below that. 2 of those units have loft space that extends to the roof deck, the 3rd floor. And those 3rd floor areas have small outdoor patios that look east. On the west half of this portion of the building, there's outdoor amenities that include a small pool, a barbecue area, and a fire pit. The perimeter of this area is screened both with a 30-inch rail with a planter of 3-foot depth, 3-foot width, and a hedge around it that would extend to 5 7 inches, as stipulated in working with staff on some of the city comments. The little diagram in the lower right-hand corner of this image begins to look specifically at some of the concerns that were voiced by neighbors about residents looking into the neighboring single-family residents' backyards. And so what actually occurs is that there's a 10-foot setback from the property line. There's actually 25 feet setback from the property line to the nearest adjacent point that a resident using the pool or the amenity deck could actually get to the south edge. And when you project those sight lines and take into account the landscape hedge you cannot see into the backyards of the adjacent 3 residences. You know, the building design, hopefully you'll agree, is an attractive building that will, we believe, complement Tempe's progressive nature. The architecture is sort of typified by a mass facade that is cut back at the ground floor to allow a lot of porosity, a lot of openness, a lot of transparency to the restaurant spaces, with the second floor mass that hovers above, providing shade and providing, you know, sort of capturing that street front activity with covered outdoor dining space. The third floor then steps back, sort of effectively cutting the mass, reducing its scale and helping to step down, you know, the building's overall mass. What you see expressed in the elevation within the mass itself is movement. The walls are sort of moving in and out, pushing and pulling. Those effectively create the space of the balconies on the north and south facades. The balcony spaces are then highlighted by an engineered wood facade that presents a warm diversity of material palette. And, you know, we think both day and night will create a very attractive image to those passing by in the city, and in particular to the residents that would choose to live here. The other view here, you know, most notably is the step down as we turn the corner to Oak. So yes, we have 3 stories approaching the south edge of the Hudson Manor neighborhood, but it's a small portion of the overall third floor footprint. It's not the entire portion, and at the peak of the roof, that height is 41 feet. The edge of the building immediately adjacent is at 30 feet. And as Diana noted, our massing steps back and is within the required sort of 1-to-1 step back, is well within it, actually. This is a view as if we were in a drone looking east towards the 101. You can see the entry to the resident garage. You can see the on-site tandem parking, the drive-through, the landscape edge that starts to establish itself at the south perimeter, the amenity portion with the 2 small massing pop-ups from the second floor residential up to the third level. So to summarize a little bit, we believe that we're presenting you a very attractive and compatible building proposal that is in line with the long-term land use principles of the city. I've highlighted a few of those here for you, intensifying higher density use within the transit hubs along the TOD. We're providing an emphasis on open space. I challenge you to find one other project that's been completed in the last 10 years in the downtown core or adjacent core that comes anywhere close to this amount of open space on the ground floor, that offers this kind of amenity and the kind of amenity that restaurateurs will benefit from. We're eliminating a vacant 2-story motel and infilling the site with a distinctive mixed-use development. It's conveniently located to neighborhood commercial spaces and ideally will help those struggling neighborhood commercial spaces start to revive over time. With projects like Apache and Oak, with the Metro 1 and 101 that DMB's proposed further down by the 101, I think the area will see a renaissance in a short period of time. We're providing multifamily for sale housing options. We're providing an efficient land use, locating density along Apache Boulevard. This is not 45 feet broadcast 75% of the entire site, or 54 feet, or 60 feet. This is height strategically located along Apache Boulevard to mitigate that massing's impact to the neighbors to the south. And you know, the development contributes to the Tempe's 20-minute city goal. So I want to address specifically, you know, we've gone through a neighborhood meeting. We've since met with the neighborhood group as a follow-up. They provided us a draft report of their concerns. There were 11 items noted, and I want to clearly address those. The first is the most contentious issue, and that is the question of amending the general plan to allow additional density and the additional height from a zoning application standpoint that we're asking for. So to be clear, we're asking for 66 feet, not 70 feet as noted. And we're asking for 46 units, 52 dwelling units per acre, not 65 dwelling units per acre. You know, in the section I touched on the sort of setbacks. I expect you'll hear from some of the residents, and as you read through some of their comments, you know, they have concerns about other projects that have come before us and how they, where the density is located, and you know, I'll simply say we exceed the amount of distance that this property is set back from the adjacent property line more than the projects that came before us that are comparable. You'll hear, I expect you'll hear neighborhood comment about comparing this project to Gracie's. We are not Gracie's. We are not a low-income apartment community with a thrift store base. This is a very different project and a very different product. And I also want to again remind you that the building massing is positioned so that 91% of the density, 42 of the 46 units, is against the Apache corridor. 17% open space. So our initial proposal included 61 dwelling units per acre, 54 units. After the initial neighborhood meeting, we were able to reduce that slightly. The benefit for the neighbors is it reduces the density a little bit. The negative to us as the developer is it reduces our flexibility to the market. We were able to squeeze the height of the building down a little bit. We went in a little conservative, given that the structure of the building hadn't been fully refined. So we went back, we scrubbed the numbers a little bit further with our structural engineer, and we were able to reduce the height of the building from the initial request of 70 feet down to 66. A small concession, I understand, given the sort of the amount of comments that have been heard, but nonetheless an effort. And you know, our parking, we're providing more than what's required. We're providing what we feel is appropriate to the market demand for the residential and restaurant. In the section, there was questions posed and concerns posed about the potential for increased traffic and concerns about traffic flow. Many of those have to do with the fact that Apache and Oak sits at a one-way intersection. It's a one-way right turn only because of the light rail improvements that have gone in. So there's no opportunity to make a left. You have to make a right and then make a left at the first light to the east to go back west. So to these 2 points, you know, we understand what the neighbors are saying. We hear them. We've commissioned a development proposal, or the city of Tempe requires to commission a traffic study The results of that traffic study were submitted to the city staff. City staff and transportation engineers reviewed it and agreed with the conclusions, which would be that there would be minimal traffic coming through the neighborhood. Now, human nature is what human nature will be, and I'm not here to argue that. I'm simply telling you what the traffic study said and what the city's engineer concurred. Our traffic engineer is here tonight. She's here specifically to answer any questions you may have as we go on. There was a concern raised about tandem parking. Why do you need it? That doesn't make sense. Valet, why do you want a valet? The reality is that successful restaurants, small-scale restaurants in cool buildings like this, when implemented and successful, bring with them traffic. They also bring with them lots of people and lots of bikes. And I think those are all good things for the neighborhood. But what has worked most successfully as we watch these kind of projects flourish throughout the valley is that those spaces be managed by valet parking. And that's what's proposed here, and that's the essence of why we've tried to squeeze as many parking spaces on site. I should say squeeze, but squeeze in a way that we're still providing a unique level of landscape. There's a row of trees, 3 spaces, a row of trees, 3 spaces. We're not trying to get every ounce of this site covered with parking. We've worked very closely with city staff to meet every one of the last requirements that exists about how many trees along which edge, spaced every 20 feet, and have managed to make that happen, have managed to squeeze all the requirements for the restaurant spaces to make those spaces happen, and to exceed the parking requirements of the TOD. The parking is split up. It's 103 total spaces, 50 underground, 47 on surface. 6 of those are tandem. 12 total spaces, 6 being tandem, meaning double parked, and 6 on-street parking spaces that are proposed as a right-of-way improvement that we will pay for. This is the location of those spaces. There was a concern voiced about the development being too intrusive, noting that we're only 30 feet of space back from the backyard fences. This is true. This is what the city code, the development ordinance mandates. That's what we're doing. But we're not doing it all the way across the entire street, the entire backyard facing the single-family residences. We're doing it only a portion and only 9% of the total density of the project in that portion. To help mitigate this, initially we had worked with staff on and our landscape architect on determining the right landscape palette that was appropriate given the neighborhood. And some of the feedback that we got on the trees during that initial session was we had a heritage oak proposed. Heritage oak is a beautiful tree, but it grows slow. So we've worked with Diana closely to identify 3 different trees, 3 different species that could be, we would open it up to the neighbors to decide which of those species is a siso tree, an evergreen elm, and an Arizona ash. And we've provided in your packets within the development proposal a detailed study of the growth of those trees, both its size at planting, either 36 or 48 inch box, and 3, 5, 10, and maturity level increments. This is one of 6 diagrams that's provided. I'll spare you the other 5 because they're all highly similar. This happens to be a siso tree. The lower silhouette, the darker silhouette's a 3-year sisu tree, 5, and a 10. The mature tree is not shown here. But what you can see from the sight lines projected both from the neighboring backyards to the balconies at the 4th and 5th floor of the Apache and Oak residential bar, that those sight lines are blocked in total at year 5. So we would invite to continue to work with the neighbors to select what the actual specimen would be, and we've worked with city staff to provide those 3 within the development package, and that's part of some of the conditions of approval that have been written. This is a view, again, from the neighborhood looking back towards the development, and you can see that the trees are starting to peak themselves up here at year 3. And year 5, and year 10, and ultimately at maturity. These are the heights that are given to us by Christina Floor, a prominent landscape architect, and this is what's represented in these renderings. And you know, the difference between the 3 species, you know, it varies. The Arizona ash is probably the most upright growing. This is a sisu tree that sits here, which tends to be a little broader. But we, as I said, we think all 3 would work and would be appropriate, and we would ask that the neighbors select what would be most appropriate for them. There was concern voiced about retail vacancy. Ms. Lloyd, I think you hit on that a little bit early on with your comments. We had concern too. And in November of last year, we met with several retail brokers to talk to them specifically about what we were proposing, what would be appropriate for this site, and the scale of the restaurant spaces and the fact that there's 2 of them small in nature is direct feedback from those groups, and we have reason to believe that we'll have good level of interest. The neighbors, you know, would like certainty. They'd like us to tell them who the restaurateur might be. Can't do that today. We don't have an approved development proposal, and we just simply can't make promises that we can't keep until we have a tangible product to take to market. What we can tell you is that we've studied it closely and looked at it closely, and we believe we provide spaces that will be highly attractive for restaurateurs in this part of town. There was concern about parking lot lighting. You guys, I suspect you deal with this a lot. Tempe has the lightest and brightest of lighting requirements using the SEPTED requirements in the valley, and there's a lot of good reasons why they exist, but they are not necessarily neighborhood friendly. Working closely with staff, we've been able to, we agree with the comments, but we've been able to mitigate that by bringing the foot candle levels down from 2 throughout the parking to 1, from 5 at gates and doors and entrances to 3, and the results of that effort are noted as conditions of approval within the documents you have in front of you. And we commend staff for working through that because we think it's a win-win for everybody. Sustainability was noted as non-existence, and I think it's more because we simply didn't get to have that conversation. But we shared that in our subsequent follow-up meeting on May 10th with the neighbors. And you know, to summarize, the building is inherently sustainable in its development if you were to compare that against 46 single-family homes built to market standard. We also propose to provide electric vehicle charging stations on site, both for resident parking and for guest parking. The building will be PV ready, solar ready. We are not committing to providing solar panels, but it is our goal to be able to do that, to provide a near net zero electric power cost to the residents of this building. That's important because it keeps the HOA cost low. And the lower the HOA cost, the more attainable it is to live in a product like this. So there's technology integrated throughout. We will integrate electric vehicle charging stations, and this is just a list of some of the things that we plan to do from a sustainable design strategy within the development. It was brought up that there was no public art component proposed. This is true. There's no requirement for one, but there is opportunity. You know, there's a couple areas in the development at the ground level where we think there could be opportunity to add urban street art, murals on the walls, perhaps sculpture to help strengthen the sort of feel, the neighborhood quality of the courtyard spaces. The last concern was noise. And you know, this comes from, I think, experience of what came before this project. It comes from experience of other developments down the street that cater to more of a student population. This is a for sale product. There will be CC&Rs. Those CC&Rs have rules and regulations. They're set by the developer, they're established by the developer, by development attorney. They're submitted as part of the Arizona real estate review process before anything can be sold. And there was a request on our meeting on the 10th that we would involve the neighbors in looking at how we might be able to limit the hours of occupancy for that third level. Limit light, limit noise, and those are all things that we're open to. More importantly, we think they're things that are required to make our product competitive to the people that would buy here. So that suggestion's a win-win for everybody. So to summarize our application request, we're asking for 46 units, 52 dwelling units per acre. I'm getting old because I can't see that screen like I used to be able to. 66 feet of height at the Apache massing, stepping down to 30 feet with the two peaks at 41 feet, which are the loft spaces that come up from the second floor. The total building area is a little over 97,000 square feet. That includes the underground area of 24,000 square feet, underground parking area. And parking provided versus required is also noted there. And again, the setbacks of the major part of the massing from the adjacent property line and the neighbor are noted. So I just want to leave you with a couple thoughts on what makes a great place. Great places are made up of buildings that breed community, that are social, that have a variety of uses and activities, that have an open and active ground floor. We can point to dozens of projects that have been built and approved that hit the ground in a very hard way and really present no opportunity for the residents to interact with their neighbors. The building must be comfortable. It must present a welcoming image and be an attractive component of the city. And it must be accessible, and in this case, tied to transit. We have bikes built in for our residents. We're accommodating parking below grade at an extreme expense. So $10,000 to $12,000 premium of an undergrade spot above a on-grade podium structured space. So the proposal, we feel, will be a great place. And we believe it'll have a positive local impact. It'll be designed, built, developed, marketed, sold by local people. It will activate Apache Boulevard. It'll certainly be connected to transit and support the goals of the 2040 general plan. It's walkable, it's bikeable, it's smart, modern design, and it provides an attainable housing choice. And with a 9-to-1 rental to for sale ratio, we believe it's something that's desired in the Tempe core. So with that, I'd like to open the floor up to you for questions, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And Sarah Simpson is here also, as I noted, to address any concerns, questions, comments you may have about parking or transportation-related issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boyer. All right, so questions for our applicant? Well, I have one, and this is a relatively minor thing. If you'd like to, you can approach the podium again just for our little questions. I'll say that well, first let me say, I really appreciate this design. I think it's very clever. I think it's good. A small pocket of urban life. I think it's very well executed, and I appreciate the quality of the presentation as well. One kind of question that I have is with respect to those trees around the project. I'm personally not one to get too excited about will somebody be able to see their neighbor. I don't view that as a huge concern. But I appreciate the effort you went through to provide diagrams that show the growth of these trees and how they will block sight lines. I'm afraid I'm just not entirely convinced, though, because they're so close to the building. It looks to me like, at least on the south side, they occur within a 10-foot margin, which means the trunks are located roughly 5 foot from the walls of the building. And I'm not sure that they will grow in a way that's conducive to get very big. I mean, I have a big tree in my front yard that's, I don't know, 20 feet from the front of the house, and a branch fell on the roof the other day. So if you're that close to the building, I wonder if that's maybe a little problematic. Is that something you'd care to respond to?
Well, how about this? I will try. I don't pretend to be a landscape architect, but I can tell you that I understand your point as a valid point. Part of the site design of the building, of the ground plane, actually slopes to the south and to the west. So water runoff will be captured within a depressed area, which will actually serve as, during rain events, serve as a bit of a cistern there, which will help the trees ultimately. But there, there's 10 feet, actually more like 9, just a hair under 10 feet on the south. That's continuous, that the trees are planted in. On the west, it's actually less. It's less than 7 feet on the west. I think the overall concern from the neighbors is to the south, less to the west. We haven't heard from our multifamily neighbor to the west. But I think the trees are spaced at 20 feet on center. That's a requirement in per the development guidelines, and yeah, I can. Sorry, the cons of a comprehensive presentation that you have too many slides. So there's 10 trees, 20 feet on center at the south edge of the property, as shown. And the first 8 would reside in that catchment basin.
Yeah, I have no doubt that they can be done in a way that's attractive and relatively effective. But I thought I'd raise the question and give you a chance to respond to it.
Yeah, if you like, I'm certainly willing. We'll discuss it more with Chris, see if she has any concerns. One of the other things we've done is the parking spaces actually have porous pavement in them, pavers. So there's also a slight amount of rainwater saturation that would happen in the parking areas themselves. The drive aisle is, of course, concrete because it's a fire truck access way.
Those porous pavers, are they, is it like a grasscrete or is it DG in the paver, or
No,
what are you thinking about?
They have a small amount of open space in them. I don't think it's paved stone, but the detail of the paver and the type is actually within the package that you have from Diana.
I have 2 more questions for you, and if you'll indulge me, I'm going to ask the frivolous one first, because I'm going to follow up with something that's a little more difficult. I don't know what happened with technology along the way, but in our packet we have a very interesting email from you. It's very short, and for some reason the letter I and the lowercase letter L have disappeared throughout the text. It reads rather comically. The last line says, "Let me know if you have any ad-ana questions." I guess that's not really a question, but I just thought that was humorous. We'll have more public questions later. But here's a little bit more challenging question or remark. I think you've done an admirable job speaking about how the density of your project is distributed and how that makes sense. I personally don't have a problem with the zoning request. The one part that's just a little sticky for me is the general plan amendment asking for additional density. So not a big sticking point for me, but I'd like to ask the question. A little preface. We understand why it's advantageous to a developer to have additional density. We understand from your point of view and your client's point of view why that would be advantageous. But the question is, in what way do you believe the city benefits from having a little additional density there?
Well, my opinion is that it's an eventuality that there will be more density along Apache. My opinion is that you want that to be good architectural quality development. And, if this development isn't approved, some other will come after us, and some other will come on another site within the area. But I think we believe we're doing the right things here. We believe that by putting the density along Apache, that it's an appropriate, sensitive move to the neighborhood. We believe that the market, the embedded market flexibility to what we've proposed is an important aspect to our ability to be successful, for this to be a sustainable project, not only at the ground floor. The ground floor, frankly, is mostly carried dead weight from a financial investment standpoint. But the reason for the 46 and the initial 54 was to provide us with the most flexibility. If we could sell this project to all 3-bedroom buyers and combine the units, we would want to do that. And we have that flexibility to combine the units. The way the building, if you look at the floor plans in your package, they've specifically been designed to allow for that flexibility, to allow for this product to be adaptable to the market. Because what the market is today isn't necessarily what's going to be in 2 years from now. And so we have to be prepared to shift and jive with that market to still deliver a great product. And right now, what we know is that there's more demand for smaller scale units. And so therefore, what's proposed to you is a mix of smaller scale units. Now, we've added more larger scale units than we would like to. We've effectively eliminated some of our flexibility, some of our market flexibility to respond to some of the neighbors' concerns. But I think ultimately the thing that we or any developer can do for you best is to make sure that they deliver a quality product that stands the test of time and that's looked at a place that contributes to, in this case, the Apache character area.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Boyer. Commissioners. Commissioner Brown.
Can you
Yeah, so the capital investment is roughly $16 to $18 million for this development, and we expect that the unit price will be somewhere between $325 and $400 a square foot. Smaller the units, the higher the price per square foot.
Any other questions for our applicant? Well, Mr. Boyer, we'll thank you for your remarks.
Thank you for your time.
Certainly. All right. So I know many of you have been eager to express your ideas and your concerns about this project. That's part of what we're here for. If you'd like to speak on the case and have not yet filled out one of these white cards in the back, please do so. I will go through these and ask you one at a time if you'd like to come and speak. There are a fair number of you, so I'd like to ask you to be respectful of the 3-minute time limit that we ask people to take. There are a couple of lights up here that let you know how you're doing. When you see red, we'd like you to wrap it up and leave time for others to speak. You know, I've got another comment from Linda Spears here, which I need to read. If you'll give me a moment, I can get to that. Okay, thank you. Linda Spears says, I really like the articulation of the apartment building, and applicants should be commended for the level of detail of the drawings in the submittal. That's Linda Spears of Tempe. Next up, we have, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name. I may not necessarily read it correctly. Nancy Gasowski, if you'd like to come up and share your thoughts with us, please. And just for the record, if you'd state not only your name, but your place of residence for the record.
Okay, Nancy Gasowski, 1437 East Hudson Drive in Tempe. That would be the street directly affected. And we also own a property at 1440, which is directly behind the development. And I've been in the neighborhood since 72. So long-time Tempe resident, and really happy that we've lived here and we've contributed to the community, not only as volunteers, but also as educators. I highly recommend to the DRC that we do not change the zoning on this property. It's a small piece of property. It's very small. It's less than an acre, I do believe, and 25 units per acre is, I think, the actual CCS or CC, whatever that is. But I just want you to know that I oppose this proposal at this time. And that's all. So thank you all for putting all your input into it, the architect, the owner, and the developers. You know, it's been presented very well, and thanks for your time.
Ms. Gosowski, thank you. You're very gracious. If you're willing, we'd like to have a chance for our commissioners to ask you
Oh,
questions.
certainly. I
Commissioner
did
Ludwig?
submit a letter also. That should be in the packet.
Commissioner Rodney.
Thank you for your comments. I just have one quick question. So the way I understand it, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but we've also heard it from the applicant, that the existing zoning and the existing land use from the general plan would allow by right, without a real subjective approval, something to be built that is closer to you and while lower, effectively similar, because it would build to the same, it would be set back and step down, but it would be at the same level. Do you have thoughts on, is there a reason why this specific project is better or worse than what would be allowed by right without changing the zoning?
I feel the city has set a precedent in zoning, and they're always approving it. And I think it's time to listen to the neighbors that disapprove. And I'm probably not answering your question, but that's exactly how I feel. And to have 2 stories or 3 stories even for that property, I find too much. I mean, the 2 stories fine, but 3 stories is just not really very great in our neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
And then the building to the west, I believe, is only 2 stories, if I'm not mistaken, either 2 or 3. So I think that that west side, you know, the apartments that are next to it, I don't know what kind of distance there is between those 2 structures. I don't know if that's been considered at all. And then the traffic in our neighborhood.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Gosowski. I have a comment here from, I think it says Anthony Fosina. He says, it's too tall, too close to single-family houses, does not comply with current general plan. Jim Felke, if you'd like to speak.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, just
All
your
right.
name and place of residence, please.
My name is Jim Felke. I live at 1417 East Hudson Drive. I'm directly southwest of the development. Okay, when I purchased my house in 1991, there were certain things I was looking for. One of them was I did not want to be in an HOA. Reason being is I am a licensed amateur radio operator. In fact, I'm the only one, I believe, in that neighborhood. If the grid goes down, you'll be calling on me. I'm also the vice president of the Center for Amateur Radio Learning at the Arizona Science Center. I am a retired teacher, taught science for 25 years in the public schools. Okay, when I picked my place out, there was a lot of reason. I wrote a letter. One of it had to do with my parents. The housing plan, the housing format was the same as what my parents was. So I thought if they got older and I was going to take them in, it would be much better to have a house that they were familiar with. In fact, that did pay off in the long run. But the other thing is my antenna height, okay, is I do operate high frequency. I operate on all the bands, okay, and one of the coveted directions is northwest. Okay, this property is about 200 feet away from me. Okay, my antennas are at the legal limit of 30 feet without a permit. Okay, if I was to get a variance, I can go as high as 75 feet in Tempe. Okay, when I originally moved to Tempe, the height was changed from 100 to 75 feet with a variance. So there are some towers still here in the town that are 100 feet. Actually, the higher you get, the better it works for everyone. You can't see it when it's way up in the air, and I get out a lot better because radio frequency is the line of sight. So if you put up a 70-foot building or 66-foot building, and my antennas are 30 feet, and my desired long path propagation is exactly north east, you're going to be right in my way. Not to mention the traffic. Okay, I live in a little different part of. I live on the far west side of the development, and since they put in light rail, there's a cut through. They cut through on Elm, and they go past my property, and even at high rates of speed, there has been chases through my property. Past my property. I know because I have them on camera. Okay. The light rail did not do us any favors as far as traffic in our neighborhood. It's really increased it considerably. Okay, when you talking about a development like
Mr.
this.
Felke, if you could kind of wrap it up for us,
Okay,
please.
talking about a development like this is going to increase traffic. So I say that I would like the zoning to stay the same. I don't think it needs to be upped any higher.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Felke? Thank you. All right. We're going to keep moving right along. I have Ron Gosowski.
Good evening. My name is Ron Gosowski. My wife Nancy and I own two properties on Hudson Drive, one on the south side and one on the north side, and both within vision, site-wise, of the proposed apartment complex. I am a retired ASU professor of art and design, and I've also done a great deal of public art projects within the city and within the country and even outside of the country. And I'm familiar with these kinds of drawings and the silver tongues of architects and their magnificent drawings and wonderful presentation that was delivered to you for more than 1 hour, and we get 3 minutes each to talk to you about our disgust at what is being proposed here. We are slowly being enveloped, and it doesn't take much of imagination that perhaps the city and maybe even ASU is eyeing Hudson Manor for eventual high-rise apartments. That's very easy to imagine. We're pinned in on the west by the new Nexus, and it hasn't even been occupied yet. The Metro Center over on Clintock and Apache has destroyed our view of the Superstition Mountains. And now this project comes up, and they're all just looming over us. The idea of tandem parking with a valet I find really comical. And with the number of cars that are going to be at the restaurant, I wonder what kind of a valet company would even take on such a project. Moving cars back and forth, you're parked in front of me, I'm back of you, blah, blah, blah. On the second story, this pool and barbecue on the second floor, I think it should be called a party floor. And that would be looking right down into my property, trees or no trees. And by the way, those are deciduous trees, I believe, and we can see right through them in the wintertime. The the general plan as it is, and with the transportation overlay on that particular piece of property, a tiny piece on the northwest corner of that property is within the transportation overlay zone. I don't mind a 5-story building on that little piece of property, but not the rest of it, because the rest of it isn't in that zone. So it's like my neighbor asked if he could use some of my property to put his fence in because he doesn't have enough room. Does that give him the right to own my property or to do with what he wants with my property? I find it to be ridiculous.
Mr. Gosowski, do you want to give us your closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts are I'm adamantly opposed to the project. I think it's a beautiful project, and it would be great on a bigger piece of property somewhere else. But it doesn't fit into the whole neighborhood of Hudson Manor and the rest of the, like Food City across the street. Come on. It's like it would be a sore thumb.
Okay.
Thanks.
Questions? Thank you, Mr. Gosowski. We'll keep rolling right along. Deborah Zajac?
Hello, my name's Deborah Zajac, and I'm a Tempe resident for 23 years. I live at 1711 North McAllister. I do not live in a neighborhood adjacent to this project, but I do want to speak out because I have, where I live, been impacted by projects that have gone up that I've been unhappy with. And my reason is in the 2040 plan. It's something that we voted on. I don't think there's been one project where a developer comes up and actually presents a projects that are within the guidelines of the density of the 2040 plan. And I don't understand how there's not more pushback against this to get them to stay within what we voted on. And it was very interesting that from the very beginning when the plan was voted on, you kept hearing from the council, the voter-approved general plan, but it means nothing. That's why I'm so glad that you asked the question, what's the benefit to the city? And it was like, well, this is where the growth is happening. The residents voted on a plan, and I really think it needs to be respected, and it's not. And starting from staff on, and even when, next year when we do our 2050 plan, why doesn't someone say and be honest when they're actually doing the plan and say, no one's going to be listening to this. If we say 25, they're going to come in at 50 and say, well, we're glad it's not 65, but we doubled it, and we're supposed to be appreciative. So that's what really bothers me, and I wish there was somebody who was listening to the residents. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. I have a question for you, and I'm going to crib this question directly from Commissioner Labadie, because he sounds a lot smarter than I do. So the architect described to us that it's possible by right for them to build something nearly as tall that occupies the entire site, a big box. And it couldn't have as many residents' front doors, but it could have more bedrooms. You could have 75 or 100 or even 150 bedrooms legally built there, as long as there are only 25
units.
Front doors. So that'd be a lot more people and a lot more building is already entitled to the site. So the question is,
So it's not always density, because the way he was saying they went from 52 to 46 was by making some of the units larger, correct?
Yes. That's kind of the thrust of it. Yes,
Right.
they made some of the units two-bedroom
Larger,
units.
right, so.
Instead of you have fewer one-bedroom and more two-bedrooms
Right,
now.
so it went from.
So the number of front doors
doors
changed. Right.
So-
So does it change your thinking at all to have it put to you that you might potentially get
Worse.
worse.
I guess I haven't thought about it like that, because I do like the idea of the openness on the bottom, but it just seems things keep getting bigger and bigger, and I don't think that's what the residents, when we voted on these things, that's what was in their mind. So,
I'm sure.
okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Hi. I believe this is zoned, Deb Gain-Braley, Tempe, Arizona. I live in North Tempe, but I am concerned with this high density being adjacent to a cultural area, which doesn't occur anywhere else in the city. And so I think it would open us up to that expanding all over. That being said, I think this is zoned currently commercial, so that any other zoning from commercial shopping would require this kind of a meeting, and citizens should have input on that. So I don't think it's a guaranteed thing that it would be 25 units with 5 bedrooms each unit. So I think there would be more discussion because it would be a zoning change regardless. I don't see anywhere where there's cultural area and this higher density is around the lake where there's no single-family homes. This higher density is around downtown where there are no single-family homes. This is exceptional density. This is Tempe is a city of neighborhoods and neighbors. And things work better when you have all of the different parties coming together to come to a better solution. And we've had some of that in North Tempe. I don't see that here. I don't see where the developer and the people in the neighborhood have had the opportunity to work together to come to something that they agree upon and stay at the table until they do agree upon something. And I think that's what is required in something like this where you're requesting such an extreme change. Doesn't mean you can't find it. It just means they need to be sent back to the table. Another thing on dogs, high density, 60% of families have dogs. 60% of those have more than one dog. So where do you think they're going to walk their dogs? It isn't just that you can see in someone's yard. It's the trash. It's everything else that comes with high density. The traffic, the trash, the dog poop that you get that comes into your neighborhood when that many people move in. Anyway, sorry to bring up something so ugly, but it happens.
I didn't have my microphone on. Do I have to start over? It's not on the record. Okay, so one more time, point of clarification. You're quite right, it is currently zoned CSS, but there's another part in play, which is the general plan map, which shows it as up to 25 dwelling units is the acceptable density. So you're right, no matter what, to build residence there, you have to have this kind of meeting. But just to clarify, part of the puzzle was the density of 25 was already there, for what it's worth.
I don't disagree. I just think the parties need to talk some more.
Well said. Thank you. Matthew Salenser.
Evening, Commissioners. I'm Matthew Salinger. I live at 1614 East Cedar Street in Hudson Manor in this neighborhood, but I'm coming to you as the chair of Citizens for a Vibrant Apache Corridor, CVAC. A lot of the comments that have been raised and a lot of the things that the neighborhood raised at the meeting are all, I think, valid, with varying degrees of relevance. But I want to just concentrate on the two most egregious parts of the proposal. I'd like to preface this by saying I am an architect as well. I've known Jason for over 20 years. I know him to be a very good designer, respectable person. I think the design is attractive, which makes it all the more difficult for me to speak out against it. As much as we do want density along Apache in our neighborhood, and as much as it calls for it in the general plan, it does not call for this much density. It doesn't call for going to the highest density. And I understand why they want it. They want that flexibility to be able to sell the units. If the market says that they smaller units are what are going to sell, they can do that. If it means bigger units, they can join them together and have less density, even though it's the same amount of bedrooms. But the problem is really twofold. One is that if we allow this particular property to have this kind of density, it's against our cultural resource area, our neighborhood, where the general plan does not call for high density. It calls for low to medium density. I think specifically the color shows medium density. And they're asking for the most. If this gets granted, then other properties along the cultural resource areas are going to be potentially asking for the same thing. And we think this is completely against the 2040 plan. It's against what was voted for. It's against what our neighborhood wants. It is not acceptable by our standards at all. And the second part about the density that worries us is that this particular developer, the property owner, bought this property at a really high rate, and a rate higher than what market value probably should have been. And he could decide to get the density and quickly turn it around and sell it to another developer who could come up with something worse. And yes, we would come and we would fight that too. But we don't want to have to go through that exercise. It is my opinion that with a talented architect like this, a talented landscape architect like they have, they can find something that will work for the neighborhood. And frankly, we spoke with neighborhood residents, with the developer, and they said that they would actually prefer something that is 50 feet tall at Apache and go down to 2 stories, say 30 feet tall or less at the south side of the property. And they would accept that even if it filled up the whole property. It's not necessarily a great design, I know. I feel the same way. I think it's great that there's a narrow part that extends to the south part of the property. But the neighbors have different concerns than you and I might realize. And it really is this view issue and the height issue as well as the density. So these ideas, I mean, the trees that are in there, the point that you brought up about the trees is really valid. They're not going to grow against the building. They're not going to get big there. There's not enough room. I've talked to a couple of different landscape architects. As much as I respect Chris Floor, the amount of space that's there for the planter likely will not grow the trees this tall. And there's also electrical lines in the alley, which means they're going to have to be trimmed back. And 2 of the 3 species they're proposing are going to lose their foliage. And so the view issue, I think, is really valid. On top of that, the hedge that they're talking about along the upper level of where the pool area is has been proven time and time again never to be successful in growing those. ASU has experimented with that for years, trying to get plants to grow on rooftops, and they fail in the summer. So I think there's a lot of skepticism to the plants actually blocking this view. The height is really a huge problem, I think, for the neighbors, especially the people that live right there. I think what we're asking for is something that is more respectful to the neighborhood in its scale. As much as we do want the density and we do want the businesses and we do want people along Apache, there needs to be something against the cultural resource areas that we have along Apache. There's not that many, but this is one of them, and they do have multiple properties along them. We need to be able to protect them. That's what the voters voted on. We need to stick with that, and I'll take your questions.
I will say well spoken. It looks like we don't have any questions for you.
Okay.
Thank you. Shelley White.
Hello, I'm Shelley White. I live at 1532 East Cedar in the Hudson Manor neighborhood, and I could almost just say what Matt said and be done because he did do a great job of addressing our concerns. The height is really my major concern, and my concern is maybe a little bit different than some of the other things that have been expressed here. We do have the Nexa on our west side, and while it's not right there next to my house, as I walk down the street, I see a looming a looming building that has essentially eliminated any view of any sunset that you would ever see walking down the street on that side, walking towards the west. So in effect, that has started to create a canyon effect in our neighborhood. Our neighborhood struggles continuously with the number of rental units that we have in the neighborhood as opposed to homes owned and lived in. And I feel like all of those houses on that side of Cedar that are below that looming building will now never again be bought by someone who's going to live in them. They will all turn to rentals. Because would you buy a house with this thing looming behind you? And the same thing might occur. I could really see that happening with the height of those buildings. Even though, yes, the bulk of the height is against Apache Boulevard, even in the pictures, you can see it. As you walk down the street, you would see it, and it's overwhelming. So I think that that would start to change the character and the value of our neighborhood, and I would hate to see that happen. I love living in my neighborhood. Does anyone have any questions?
Very quiet tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Mayer.
Good evening. I'm Dan Mayer. I live at 1532 East Cedar Street, Hudson Manor. I've lived in Hudson Manor for 25 years, so it's a very special place for me. This development, I wrote a letter for the record that begins, "This is a letter of firm opposition to proposed development." That's my basic statement for a number of reasons. One is height, double high density. It does back up to the neighborhood. I think there'll be a number of issues there. The developer talks about stepping down from the back. You could also do reverse psychology and say it's stepping up, reversing it. So there's a lot of reversal information here. Essentially it's too dense, too high for the area. There's a lot of talk about restaurants and trees. Trees are going to be window dressing around something that's already too big. Restaurants, we don't think, it'd be great if they did fill. But if you look at the area, they're not filling. So if we're looking at those sort of things, those are auxiliary to what the actual development is. So that's something that may never happen as far as that goes. Essentially, bottom line, too big, too dense. You talked about if it was, say, 2 or 3 stories, and we're talking about the developer working with the neighborhood. If it were, say, for instance, 2 stories on the way back, if they'd work with us, they maybe step it back part way. That's working with the neighborhood. That's discussion. We haven't had that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Questions? Succinctly put. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Karen Gitlis.
Thank you. Karen Gitlis, 1206 South Ash Avenue, and I am the chairperson of the Maple Ash Neighborhood Association, and I am also, and Maple Ash is a cultural resource area immediately to the south, slightly west of the downtown. I'm also the chairperson of the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation. Is there any way to adjust this so that you're speaking into it? I haven't been able to hear other speakers, so I'm worried about that. Okay, I would start by stating how I feel about this speculative development. This project has too many units. The height and the density are excessive and require zoning changes. Traffic will increase based on vacancies in many of the ground floor commercial spaces built on University Drive. There may be difficulty filling these commercial spaces. Those who rent frequently find they can't afford these expensive spaces and move out. Turnover is high. Tempe is not quite ready for this pie-in-the-sky model of urban living. My opinion is that Mr. Boyer is overreaching. Tandem parking, in the cases I've seen it requested in these developments, indicates that the developer is packing too much into too small of a space. Speaking on behalf of two organizations, my neighborhood association and the Historic Preservation Foundation, I realize that you as commissioners weigh difficult and often contested courses of action concerning projects brought to you by developers. As neighbors of these projects, we need to live with the resulting product if it is approved. My request is that you consider the reasons to not grant greater zoning entitlements. This is important because the property at 1461 East Apache is adjacent to a cultural resource area. Consider that this construction will have a forever impact on this dying breed of district, cultural resource areas. We in Tempe, over the past 30 years, have had a great deal of this type of density development in our cultural resource area, so I can attest to that, and it's intrusive. The current language regarding cultural resource areas in GP 2040 is the bottom line single standard we have to protect our diminishing historic preservation resources. At this point in time, cultural resource areas amount to less than 0.5% of the existing single-family housing stock in Tempe. If I may, or if you want me to, I'll read what that is.
Actually, to save time for other speakers, could you give us your closing thoughts?
All right. I do object to that, given that the
3 minutes is our
developer had
standard.
1 hour, but I will skip that and just go to my summary statement. Please keep this development to no more than is allowed under General Plan 2040 and under the Transit Overlay District, that is the MU2 zoning at 25 units per acre. I would point out that requesting 61 units is increasing the entitlements that this developer is requesting to more than double. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Ms. Gitlis? Thank you. All right. Unless there are any more, we are at our last one. Christine Hartman.
Hi, I'm Christine Hartman. I live at 1405 East Hall Street in Tomlinson Estates, and I'm against this plan. I don't feel the case for amending the general plan has been made, the case to increase to MU4. I was a part of a neighborhood effort several years ago when Gracie's Village was in planning and development, and I feel like the neighbors and the developer finally reached a agreement or a compromise, really, for MU3. And I feel like that should set the limits for this stretch of Apache between Dorsey and McClintock. I don't see why this development would deserve any more leeway than the developers for Gracie's. And I know as a neighbor, we worked tirelessly to voice our protest and get results, get the originally proposed plan of six stories down to really 3 stories of residential. So I think this is a beautiful plan. Trim 3 levels off of it, and I could buy into it. Thank you.
No questions? Okay, thank you. So, last chance? Okay. If you just want to hand that over and you're all set.
Hello, thank you. My name is Marilyn Murphy, and I live at 1521 East Hudson Drive. I have lived in the neighborhood almost 4 years now. I also work in downtown Phoenix, and I'm familiar with the Art House project near Central and McDowell, and find that a really attractive project that's only 2 or 3 stories. And I just want to express my concerns about the height of this project, the increase in density to it. If they say they're bringing something that fits the general plan, but they're asking for more than the general plan, and I think this would set a precedent against not protecting our cultural resource areas, and I just want to emphasize that I feel very strongly that we need to do that to prevent things like the canyon effect and the other concerns that my neighbors and friends have brought up tonight. I think earlier to your question about, what does this benefit to the city? I heard a lot about market flexibility, adaptable to the market, combining units, but what about the bigger ideas to our community? To what do we want this space between Dorsey and McClintock to be next to this cultural resource area? So thank you very much.
Thank you. That'll do. Thank you. All right. So now last call. Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, we'll close the public hearing portion, or the public comment portion, I should say. And we'll invite our applicant to return to the podium if you'd like to address any of those comments and questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And if I may say, in the interest of time, I think that you can probably be relatively brief in your responses.
Fair enough. I think you heard a variety of good comments. The neighbors have the right to feel that way, and I respect their opinions. I've been a resident of Tempe before. I don't live there today, but I have lived there in the past, and I've gone to school there. So I understand how the area has changed. But principally, I understand and believe that what we're proposing is a qualitative addition to the city. It has its trade-offs. We're asking for some additional height in certain areas, but what we're giving to offset that, I think, outweighs the density and height that we're asking for. The issue for you all is that you're asked to help determine what's most appropriate and rule on that. My hope here tonight was to come here and share with you the things that we are doing with the neighborhood to respond to their concerns. I think there was 11 concerns forwarded to us under Phil's sort of authorship originally, and I feel like we've honestly responded very well to 9 of those 11. The 2 really at odds here, as Matthew put it, are the density and height issues. So, we're sort of confronted with this condition. This isn't an easy decision by any means, and we recognize that you're understaffed. Our goal here was to come tonight and make sure you understood what we are doing, and what we are actively trying to do, and the qualitative aspects of what we're trying to propose. So what I'm hopeful is that we can hear some discussion from you. But I would also ask that, given the condition of this commission this evening, that we seek a continuance until the next hearing, which would be, I believe, the June 13th hearing. So that's my formal request, but I also ask that you provide us with any strategic feedback you all might do tonight.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Boyer. So you're one step ahead of me, which is nice. I was going to tell you that it is your right to ask for a continuance because we're shorthanded. To all our concerned citizens, thank you for coming and expressing your opinions. We did not want anyone to go away without the chance to express those. But because we have a short counsel tonight, the applicant does have the right to continue the case till when we have a full a quorum of 7. And the applicant has asked to do so. So looks like that's what's going to happen. There'll be another chance to meet and talk about the project, and we'll see where things go from there. Am I missing anything, or we just call for the motion? Oh, you wanted to hear comments. Okay, well, yeah, I think we can certainly have our commissioner discussion, and you'll know where we're standing on things. And so let's open that up. Commissioners, what do you think of the project? Commissioner Labadie.
I guess, first of all, I appreciate everybody coming out. It's rare for a neighborhood to be this vocal, and it's the only way that boards like this know what the neighbors think. And so it always makes me happy to see people come out, because you're taking time out of your day. We volunteered for this, and they're getting paid, so it's nice to hear. My feeling on this is I'm torn. I look at this project for what it is on, take everything away around it. This is an amazing project. This first floor is, I think, is a fantastic thing for a corridor like Apache. It's really great. The openness, the different uses down there, the way a 17% lot coverage, even if that's just first floor and that it bumps up as you go higher, is great. The parking, as I hear that discussed, I subtract the 6 spaces that are in the right-of-way. If you did not tandem park those other spaces, if I'm not mistaken, they're either one over or one under the requirement still. So it's not that they were forcing parking in, but that they were adding parking such that the tandem parking is additional. And actually, it's a very typical scenario nowadays for valets to handle parking that way. They move cars like that all the time, whether they're tandem spaces or not in a lot of cases. I think that in a transit-oriented development area, whether it's a corner of it, undisputably, this is along Apache, and where we just saw in our study session, there's going to be a streetcar stop. I think for a number of reasons, not the least of which what I consider an excellent design, this is a great project for this location. I'm torn because obviously the surrounding neighborhood is not happy with this. I was hoping to hear more about why this is worse than what other projects could be that could come in and ask for that. And I appreciate one person mentioning that, well, yeah, we'd rather it was one large mass closer if it was a little bit shorter. I'm not sure I understand the logic, because to me that's far worse, but everybody's entitled to their opinion. I don't know that everybody else understands that, or that we all understand exactly what that process would look like if somebody wanted to bring something at that height or 25 units before this commission. I'll try to be brief here. I guess I just wanted, we're not making a decision, so I'm glad that I'm not voting today, because I am still torn, and I would like to see the applicant and the community get together and discuss further whether that results in more change or not. It is what it is, but I would like to at least see that dialogue continued. I acknowledge that the applicant has made some changes. It has come down. The unit count has gone down. There have been changes, but I'd like to see that discussion continued. I guess that's my 2 cents. Or 75 cents, I guess I rattled on.
Thank you, Commissioner Labadie. Commissioner Lloyd.
Thank you, Commissioner Lyon. I wrote down on my paper that I'm torn, and so I do want to thank everybody for coming out tonight too. I would like to see the site redeveloped based upon what it is today, and I know that it will eventually be redeveloped. I like the site plan, I like the design of the building, the open space, and the minimal lot coverage that you did take into consideration. So I think those are huge, and the design step down, I think, does try to make that accommodation to the neighborhood. But where I'm torn is the overwhelming input over height and density versus the general plan. The general plan was put into place relatively recently for a reason, and it had strong neighborhood input during that time. So that does concern me about setting a precedent. I know we touched upon traffic, but not really a lot in detail. I know that the applicant talked about human nature, and prior to me even knowing that traffic was a concern on this project, when I went by it to look at it, I stopped along Oak, and then what did I do when I was done looking at it? I drove through Hudson Manor and came out just like everybody's concerned about. So that is, I think, still a real issue that probably needs to be looked at closer. I don't know how you do a traffic study that you can swear by when nobody's going to the site right now. So that's really hard to determine how many people are going to drive through that neighborhood. And I'll just go back to it for what it's worth regarding that ground floor retail. The applicant himself called it dead weight, so maybe if it wasn't mandated on this particular project, we could eliminate a floor. That could be pie in the sky, but I'm just putting that in there as something to think about to potentially add more residential to the ground floor so they can get their unit count without going as high. One other thing that does concern me, because I feel like we've seen this movie before, is the amount of studios. When we're talking about $400 a square foot for studio, it doesn't give me a good sense that these are going to be owner occupied. So those are my concerns, so you wanted to hear them, and so thank you for all your detail tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner Lloyd. Amorosi or Brown, any thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to hold the bulk of my comments for when the vote actually counts. But I did want to mention, I think it's a little disingenuous of my fellow commissioners to scare the residents by saying if they just build 25 units, they can increase the bedroom count to get the same amount of bedrooms, when we know the City Council pretty much said they're not going to approve anything that has all 4 and 5 bedroom units. So let's bring that back a little bit and respect the 25 units for what it is, because if it comes to that, they will have to come in front of us for that project. Thank you.
All right. Mike is still on.
I'm sorry. I'll refrain from going on very long, except to comment that the residents who came here were heard very well, and I appreciate the clarity with which you spoke.
Okay, thank you, commissioners. So it falls to me to make my remarks. Again, thank you everyone for coming and speaking. Even though the case will be continued, your comments will live in the record and in our memories, so don't worry about that. Of course, if you'd like to come to the continuation case, you can come to that, and you'll have a chance to speak there as well. And I appreciate the sentiment and the thoughtfulness behind these remarks. So these kind of cases always lend an opportunity to think about what changes are coming to the city, and how are we going to speak in a way that influences what they are. Obviously, the city is going to keep getting bigger. We're going to hopefully have more commerce and prosperity. And the shape of economic forces, you know, there's little we can do to hold that back. My thought is that change is absolutely coming to your neighborhood. There's a light rail station right there. So that die has been cast. Something is coming. There are a number of apartment complexes that are arriving just to the west. I am not favorably impressed with many of them. I think a lot of them are pretty unattractive, large blocks of apartments. So when considering this case, I have to say, well, yes, they are technically asking for a couple of exceptions. We hear that frequently, and it is not really our job to measure everything to the rule book and say, does this fit the rules exactly? It's our job to say, does this make sense for Tempe, given all the rules as guidance? And I believe that the general plan and the zoning are what they are to influence the kind of development that's going to show up there. Despite Commissioner Amorosi's comment about 4 and 5 bedrooms, I do hold still that it is readily possible for you to get something in that neighborhood that you would like a lot less. I mean, we've certainly seen those. For me, it comes down to, is this a good use for this land? And I think that it is. I think it is a very attractive, very well-designed, very well-planned project. It is clever. It is, I believe, has a very high chance of being a successful urban space because of how they've planned it. It makes good use of its circulation, its parking. It has extra parking. I think you're actually not getting that many new residents. There's that numbers game of, well, yes, it's 46 units, 46 mailboxes, and the general plan says you're only allowed 25. But the reality is it isn't as many more people as you may think, because the overwhelming majority of these are single residents. So it's not as bad as you think. And the 66-foot height, yes, it is a little taller, but it is pulled away from the places where you don't want that height. And if you had instead a 50-foot block, which was very close to you, that would loom even more. So if we end up saying no to this project, you will certainly get something else. And it's a question of, is that going to be better? Unfortunately, we don't get to say what that is because we're not the ones personally paying for what is built there. Somebody's going to build something. And for my money, I think this is as good as it's going to get. So I would support the project. Having said that, we're not voting tonight. So I think that concludes our comments on the matter. Unless there's anything else that you'd like to bring before us, we'll go ahead and call for a vote to continue.
No further comments, thank you.
We don't ordinarily allow another public comment, but
like a view, shows all the views from all the neighborhoods to that building. I would like to see the view from the building.
okay, well taken, and let's go ahead and not make this into, we'll take that well and cut it off there. So if you'd like to consider that in your documents, I know I saw some things that attempted to speak to that, but if you want to address that in a different way, maybe take that to mind. And with that, I will hear a motion to continue.
All right.
Commissioner Lloyd.
All right. I will move to continue to hear the case for Apache and Oak PL 160429 to the next hearing, which will be held June 13th.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion to continue the case until June 13th, and a question or comment.
Do we want to just say continue into the future, because we don't know how much dialogue will occur between the developer and the neighborhood, and I'm not sure if the next 10 days are sufficient.
I believe I heard specifically June 13th, but do you want to make it indefinite and you reschedule it?
I think the intent of Mr. Brown's comment is valid. Our intent is to come back on the 13th of June. We can leave it open-ended, but more than likely we will seek to meet with neighbors again, and we will seek to come back on the 13th of June.
Okay. Would you like to amend your motion to make it indefinite?
I will amend my motion.
Chairman, just a reminder to the commission, if we don't do a date specific right now, staff needs to have enough time for a next date for mailing and notification. If it is a date specific, we don't need to have a notification mailed out again. But so if we don't do it to June 13th, and we don't have enough time to then remail if something happens after the mailing date and the Arizona Republic publication and all of that stuff.
B.
What I suggest?
Mr. Boyer.
If I may, just simplify the process, we'd like to just hold the 13th date.
Good show. All right, so we have our motion to continue until June 13th. All those in favor by show of hands?
Chairman,
Another
just to-
question. What did I miss? I
Just
missed a lot
another
tonight.
comment, just to address Commissioner Brown's concern. If it comes to a point where it's not ready to go yet, the applicant can come to the June 13th hearing and request another continuance. So,
That might be the best for everyone concerned.
Okay, any other comments? All right, we're going to do it this time. All those in favor of continuing till June 13 by show of hands, please. But he did, thank you. So I see 5-0 to continue. All right, thank you, everyone. With that, we have commission member announcements and city staff announcements. Any announcements, commission members? Parna?
if you would like me to announce, we do have June 13th, a request for an approval of an use permit to allow a bar, Series 6 for 5th Street Prepared Food Market and Bar, located on 24 West 5th Street. And we would also have the Apache and Oak project now on that agenda. So thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned. Thank you.